In Fort Lauderdale, there's a yacht, 190 feet, $40 million, a private crew, a gym, a library. It belongs to a heart surgeon named Ralph de la Torre. 90 minutes north of Boston, there's a building he used to own. It was a hospital, 16,000 emergency visits a year. Today, the windows are smashed and the grass is waist high. These two things are connected. The yacht was paid for, in part, with money that used to belong to that hospital, and to more than 30 others across America. He raised hundreds of millions to buy them. He ran some of them into the ground. Federal regulators say at least 15 patients died. And when it was over, De La Torre didn't lose money. He kept the yacht. This is how he did it, and why, so far, no one has charged him with a crime. But before the numbers, you need to meet someone. Her name was Sungida Rashid. She was 39 years old. In October of 2023, she walked into one of his hospitals in Boston to give birth to her first daughter. The delivery went fine, and then she started to bleed. It was her liver, internally. The kind of bleed a hospital like this one is built to stop. There is a device for exactly this, a small coil threaded into the artery that closes the wound from the inside. The doctors called for it. It wasn't there. Weeks earlier, the company that made those coils had come to the hospital and taken them back, repossessed, because the hospital's owner hadn't paid the bill. So they put Sungida in an ambulance. Her husband, Nabil, watched them wheel her out, wrapped in silver blankets, surrounded by bags of blood, and drive her to another hospital that still had the device. She never came back. She died before they could use it. The same year his hospital couldn't pay for the device that would have saved her, De La Torre paid himself a dividend. The lawsuit puts his personal share at $81 million. You've heard about the yacht. What you haven't heard is what's written in the court filing against him, line by line, transaction by transaction. We read all of it, and tonight we're going to show you exactly where every dollar went and exactly what it cost. Because Sungida Rashid was not a fluke. At that same hospital, when newborn babies died, there were no bereavement boxes, the small cases used to carry an infant's body to the morgue. The company hadn't paid for them, so the nurses carried the babies in cardboard shipping boxes. And then, on their own time, with their own money, they went online and bought the proper ones themselves. That is not a budget cut. That is what these hospitals had become. So how does a hospital in a major American city run out of money for a coil and for bereavement boxes, while the man at the top is wiring himself $81 million? Where did the money go? Why couldn't these hospitals afford to keep a patient alive? And how, after at least 15 people died, has no one been charged with anything? 3 questions. The answers are all in the same place. So let's start at the beginning, but not where you think. His name is Ralph de la Torre, and here is the part that's hard to hold in your head. He's a heart surgeon, trained at Duke, at MIT, at Harvard Medical School. For years, his hands did the most extraordinary thing a pair of human hands can do: reach into a chest, take hold of a heart that has stopped, and start it again. He spoke, often and passionately, about fixing American healthcare, about bringing real medicine to the communities everyone else had written off. The people who met him believed him. That was the whole point. Hold that image, the surgeon who restarts hearts. Because everything that comes next was built by the same man. In 2010, De La Torre brought in a partner, a private equity firm called Cerberus. Together, they bought a struggling chain of Catholic hospitals in Massachusetts, the system that ran St. Elizabeth's, the hospital where Sungida would one day give birth. The price was around $895 million. They paid off the old debt, they took on the pension, and they changed the one thing that mattered most. These hospitals had been a non-profit, a charity. Now they were a business, owned by investors, and built, like any business, to return their money. The state attorney general let the deal go through, but she wasn't naive. She attached a condition, a monitor watching the company for 5 years. Limits on how much debt it could take on, limits on how fast it could grow. For 5 years, that monitor was the only thing standing between these hospitals and the people who wanted to drain them. In 2015, the 5 years were up. The monitor left, and the moment the leash came off, they didn't build anything. They started taking it apart. So how do you pull a fortune out of hospitals that treat the poor and the uninsured? You don't touch the medicine. You go after the one thing every hospital sits on top of: the land. Here's the move. Steward sold the ground underneath its own hospitals to a real estate company called Medical Properties Trust, MPT, and then it rented that same ground back. The The land sale raised around $1.2 billion. It was sold to everyone as good news, a cash infusion, money to reinvest, money to make the hospitals stronger. That is not what happened to it. This is the single transaction you need to understand. Everything else in this story is a footnote to it. As the company was sinking, the trustees' lawsuit alleges that De La Torre organized a dividend of $111 million. His own share, according to the complaint, roughly $81.5 million. $81 million to one man, while his hospitals were running out of cash. Now hold that against this. In the very same window, Steward stopped paying its bills. And one of the companies it stopped paying was Penumbra, the company supplying the embolization coils to St. Elizabeth's. Steward owed it about $2.5 million, so Penumbra came, and it took its coils back. Those are the coils that weren't there for Sungida Rashid, and here's the detail that should sit in your chest. Some of the staff had been afraid of exactly this. They had raised the alarm. They had argued about it among themselves weeks before. The warning just never made it to the operating room in time. He paid himself $81 million. He would not pay $2.5. And a 39-year-old mother bled to death in the back of an ambulance over the difference. And that is one line of the lawsuit. There's the $700 million Cerberus pulled out before it walked away in 2021. There's the roughly $200 million the complaint says De La Torre overpaid for a cluster of hospitals in Miami. There's the $134 million allegedly funneled out through the sale of a side business. There's the inner circle, 3 executives the complaint names by name, who split millions more between them. Add it all up, and the amended lawsuit now demands $3.4 billion in damages. But there is a question buried under all of these numbers, and it's the one that actually breaks the story open. Why was a top-rated Boston hospital broke in the first place? Go back to the land. When Steward sold the ground out from under its hospitals, the money left the building, into dividends, into executives' accounts, out the door. But the hospitals didn't stop needing that ground. They were still standing on it, so now they had to rent it, forever, at rates that only ever went up. By the end, Steward owed its landlord $6.6 billion in lease payments. There's your answer. The money that could have paid for a coil went to rent instead. And here is the part that should keep you up tonight. The landlord, MPT, was paid in a way that rewarded exactly one thing: higher rent. The more it could squeeze out of a hospital, the better it did, even if that rent eventually put the hospital in the ground. The incentive wasn't separate from the harm. The incentive was the harm. By the end of 2025, MPT held the land under 388 hospitals. A study out of Harvard found that hospitals owned this way, with a real estate company holding their land beneath them, are far more likely to close or go bankrupt than hospitals that own the ground they stand on. This is not history. This is a working model, and it is still running right now. While Steward's hospitals went dark, the chief executive of MPT did just fine. Public records put his pay at $16 million in 2024 alone. Across a few years, around $70 million. And Sungida's coils were not the only thing that vanished. In Massachusetts alone, at least 16 vendors went unpaid, including the company that ran dialysis, the treatment that keeps people with failing kidneys alive from one week to the next. The shortages weren't an accident. They weren't a bad month. They are what happens every single time when the cash that's supposed to run a hospital is quietly being routed somewhere else. De La Torre, through all of this, kept the yacht, and to this day, he has not been charged with a crime. Let's stop on what it actually cost. Federal regulators say at least 15 patients died at Steward hospitals because of missing equipment or missing staff. Roughly 2,000 more were placed in what those regulators called immediate peril. And the hospitals themselves? Kearney Hospital in Dorchester closed. Neshoba Valley, an hour outside Boston, closed. Quincy Medical Center was shut years before that, leaving an entire city with no emergency room at all. In Youngstown, Ohio, Steward closed a hospital 1 year after buying it. Every one of those is a town that now measures the distance to its nearest emergency room in miles, and in minutes, and eventually, in lives. So what's happened to the people who did this? Ralph de la Torre was subpoenaed by the United States Senate. He refused to appear. The Senate voted, every single member, both parties, to hold him in criminal contempt of Congress. A federal criminal investigation was opened in the summer of 2024, and as of tonight, he has not been charged with anything at all. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in May of 2024. Reorganization, not the end of the story. Its hospitals were sold off or shut down, one at a time. But the men who ran it did not go down with it. That's the real math of this whole story. The lenders got paid. Cerberus got its $700 million. De la Torre got the yacht. Sungida Rashid's daughter got a court filing where her mother is supposed to be. So who killed these hospitals? Not the market. Not rural decline. Not the rising cost of care. Those are the words people reach for when they'd rather you didn't look at the receipts. These hospitals were bled, deliberately, by men who sold the ground out from under the sick, paid themselves on the way down, and left a bill that the patients settled with their lives. And here's the part no one in that boardroom will say out loud. Nothing here malfunctioned. Almost nothing here was even illegal. Every step of it, the sale, the rent, the dividend, the repossession, worked exactly the way it was built to work. This isn't a broken system. It's working exactly as designed. And it is not over. Tonight, a single real estate company owns the land under 388 American hospitals. The same deal, the same incentive, the same ending, waiting its turn. So here is the only question left, the one you should actually sit with. Who owns the ground under your hospital? Ralph de la Torre paid himself $81 million. The device that would have saved Sungida Rashid cost a tiny fraction of that. It wasn't there, and no one has answered for it. If your local hospital was bought up by a company you've never heard of, go and find out who owns the land underneath it. Then tell us what you find. The people in the comments on this channel have cracked open more than one of these stories. We're already tracing the next one. Subscribe so you're here when we name them. The receipts are in the court filings.